Yale Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quadcast, a Yale Divinity School podcast series focusing on issues related to religion, culture, and politics. In this episode, YDS alum Emily Judd interviews Palestinian Christian leader and distinguished theologian Professor Mitri Raheb. Professor Raheb is president of Dar al-Khalima University in Bethlehem, Palestine, and is author of the book The Politics of Persecution, Middle Eastern Christians in an Age of Empire. Professor Raheb debunks the Western narrative that Middle Eastern Christians are helpless victims under constant persecution.
Our story as Christians in this region is really a story of resilience.
He also weighs in on the debate about whether Jesus was Palestinian or Israeli.
Jesus was a Palestinian Jew.
And Professor Raheb discusses the peace Palestinian Christians envisioned for the end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Palestinians and Israeli can live side by side in dignity, based on equality. That is the inclusive vision that Christians were always promoting.
You were born, raised, and still live in Bethlehem, the city of Jesus' birth, the traditional city of Jesus' birth. What is it like to live in the land where Jesus lived? And what do you want the world to know about what Bethlehem is like today?
What I would like people to know first is that Bethlehem is in Palestine, not in Israel. Many people continue to get this wrong. Second, I would like people to know that Bethlehem today is a Palestinian city, but unfortunately surrounded from three sides by a 25-foot high wall that was constructed by Israel. And the Israeli military and Israeli Jewish settlers, they control 86% of the land of Bethlehem. So we have only 14% of our own land under our own control. But Bethlehem is a city where half of the Palestinian Christian community lives. And the Palestinian Christian community is a very diverse community. So we have in Palestine 13 different churches, Orthodox, Catholics, and Protestant churches. And last but not least, Bethlehem is a city that lives on tourism. 70% of our economy depends on tourism. So we have many hotels, souvenir shops, restaurants, and usually it's a great city to visit. So hopefully the listeners can come to the little town, which is not anymore that little, and visit here after the pandemic.
I hope to go back, hopefully once everything gets back to normal. You have written a book called The Politics of Persecution, where you argue that the notion that Christians in the Middle East, that they are quote-unquote helpless victims under persecution, that this notion is a Western construct that has been used by colonial powers to promote their interests in the region. I'm wondering if you can explain this a bit further.
Yeah, indeed. The perception, I think, in the West is that the Christians in the Middle East are persecuted by Muslims. Now, this is part of the, Islamophobia that is unfortunately widespread in the West. And often the perception is that the so-called Christian West, which is not anymore Christian, do care about the Christians in this region. But again, this is also not true. In fact, because this is a colonial tactic, divide and rule. So you divide between Christians and Muslims, or the British, for example, divided between Arabs and Jews. Now they divide between Sunni and Shiite. As long as you do that, you create actually a situation where you as a colonizing power can control the people in this region. So what in the book, The Politics of Persecution, I argue that our story as Christians in this region is really a story of resilience. That in spite of everything, all the empires that came and control our region, Christians were able to survive, and in many cases even to thrive.
You mentioned a bit earlier, and I want to pick up on that theme, that there is this assumption in the West that Muslims and Christians in the Middle East are at odds, that the groups are historically sworn enemies, that there can be no good relations between these two groups, which I know for a fact is very, very false. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the historically good relations between Christians and Muslims, and how are these relations today in the Holy Land?
Christians and Muslims have been living together in our region, in the so-called Middle East, for the last 1400 years. So Muslims are not newcomers. In the West, Muslims are mainly like newcomers. They came as guest workers or as migrants. They came from a different culture. They spoke different language. They have different food, etc. This is not the case in our region because Christians and Muslims actually share in the Arabic culture. They share the Arabic language. Our traditions are very similar. Now, if we look at the history of Christian-Muslim relations in the last 200 years, we see, for example, that Christians and Muslims fought together against the Ottomans, which were basically Muslims. And again, they fought together against the British, for example, in case of Palestine. Though the British were Christians. And they fought together and they fight together against Israeli who are Jews. And so you can see actually that it's really not the religion is the problem. But again, this is what colonialism tried to divide and rule by. For example, if I give you maybe two examples, you studied in Jerusalem, and I'm sure you were told that Jerusalem has 4 quarters: a Christian,
yes,
a Muslim,
Christian, Armenian, Muslim, Jewish.
Right.
Yes.
But this is not true. This is a British invention of the 19th century, because in Christian, Jews, and Muslims were living all together in all those 4 quarters. But the British actually created this sectarian system. In 1928, the British came in Jerusalem and said it's not good to have one municipality with Christian, Jews, and Muslims working together. Let's divide it into 2 municipalities. So they created a Jewish municipality in West Jerusalem and an Arab municipality in East Jerusalem. Sectarianism is really a product, especially of the British, and this is part of the colonial legacy that we have. The British in 1947-48, they did 3 huge projects governed by sectarianism. They divided India and Pakistan along religious lines. They created the apartheid system in South Africa according to racial lines, and they divided Palestine into 2 sections according to ethno-religious lines. So this is unfortunately our colonial history.
So there was recently a big debate on social media around Christmas that I saw about whether or not Jesus was Palestinian. Most of the posts I saw about this topic were coming from Israelis and Palestinians, each arguing over the identity of Jesus. Are you familiar with this debate, and what are your thoughts? Is it constructive?
In one of my books, Faith in the Face of Empire, I start the book with a sentence, Jesus was a Palestinian Jew, which means we don't need to look at being Palestinian and being Jews as two things at the odd. Again, this is part of the sectarian mentality. Because Judaism was and is part of Palestinian history. It's part of our history. So for me, my problem is not with Judaism, and it should not be the problem of the Palestinians to negate the Jewishness of Jesus. The problem is if the Jewishness of Jesus is nationalized to mean as if Jesus were an Israeli. Jesus wasn't an Israeli. He was a Palestinian Jew.
Meaning he was a Jewish man living in Palestine. At the time, the area was called Palestine.
Correct. Because, the name Palestine, already since the Assyrian, Ramses III actually uses Philistu for the land. But since the 5th century BC, this was, until the British, this was the name of the country, Palestine. And so there was no contradiction of being Jew and being, Palestinian, being a Christian and being Palestinian, being Muslim and being Palestinians, because Palestine was always an inclusive land. It was always land with people of different religion. We had also Samaritan Palestinians until now. So there is no contradiction in that.
Now, my final question, you mentioned that you have written a book, Faith in the Face of Empire, the Bible through Palestinian eyes. Can you talk a bit about what makes Palestinian Christian theology distinct?
Yeah, I think two things. First of all, that we live in the land where it's all started. I mean, the Bible did not originate in the Bible Belt. I mean, sorry. The Bible...
No, that's a good line, though. The Bible did not originate in the Bible Belt. Yes, I think many people might think so.
So the Bible is a product of Palestine. And we cannot understand the Bible, this is my argument in the book, without understanding, the geopolitics of this region. That Palestine is surrounded by 5 empires, and these empires were, influencing the fate of this country. And the second is... And so I call the land Palestine the 5th gospel, because really you cannot understand the Bible without understanding the land. And I'm sure that was your experience.
I would argue and visiting, because once I visited the Holy Land, the entire Bible was changed for me. I saw it through it brought the Bible to life in a way. And I do have one more question, but feel free to skip it because I know we're over time. I was just thinking in my head right now, Jesus being the Prince of Peace and Christians in the Holy Land, being victims of a conflict. I know not helpless victims, but victims of a conflict, suffering from a conflict. I'm just curious, when it comes to promoting peace and having Jesus as the Prince of Peace in that theological sense, how is that interpreted on the ground, or how is that lived out on the ground? Because Christians are obviously, I think, uniquely positioned, and with Jesus being God and God preaching only nonviolence in the middle of a war, in the middle of conflict?
It was in Bethlehem 2,000 years ago that the angels sang, "Glory to God in the highest, peace on earth, goodwill to the people." And this is actually, it's a very political actually statement, because when the angels sang glory to God, it meant glory doesn't belong to the empire, to the occupier. And when they said peace on earth, this was also another political statement, because it wasn't the Pax Romana, the peace of the Romans. Basically, you go occupy and you make peace by occupying other people. No, it's a different kind of peace based on equality, on freedom. And it is really the people that God calls to be peacemakers. And so, Christians have been playing an important role, in throughout the centuries, in promoting a just peace. Not just any kind of peace, but really a just peace that the different, that the two religions and the two peoples, the three religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and the two peoples, Palestinians and Israeli, can live side by side in dignity, based on equality and cooperation. That is the inclusive vision that Christians were always promoting, against an exclusive vision of the land being controlled only by one people or one religion.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your thoughtful insight and answers to these difficult questions that I'm posing. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
You are most welcome. Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.